The morning sun cast long shadows across the palace grounds as William stood at his bedroom window, watching the gardeners tend to the rose bushes his grandmother had loved so dearly. His hands trembled slightly as he held the warm cup of tea, steam rising into the crisp autumn air. Kate noticed his stillness from across the room where she was getting dressed for what would be one of the most difficult days of their lives. "The children are asking questions again," Kate said softly, her voice carrying the weight of a mother trying to protect her little ones from the harsh realities of life. She moved toward him, her footsteps quiet on the wooden floor. "Charlotte wants to know why Gangan looks so tired lately, and George keeps asking when she'll feel better enough to play chess with him again." William's shoulders sagged as he turned away from the window. The Queen, his beloved grandmother, had been battling her illness with the same quiet dignity she had shown throughout her remarkable reign. But everyone in the family knew that time was running short. The doctors had been honest about her condition, though they spoke in careful, measured tones that somehow made the truth even more painful to hear. "What did you tell them?" William asked, setting down his teacup with a gentle clink against the saucer. His blue eyes, usually so bright and confident, looked tired and worried. The burden of being second in line to the throne had always been heavy, but knowing that his grandmother's time was limited made everything feel more urgent and precious. Kate walked over and placed her hand on his arm. "I told them that sometimes people get very sick, and all we can do is love them and spend time with them while we can." Charlotte seemed to understand, but George... She paused, thinking of their eldest son's serious expression when she had tried to explain. George asked if being queen made Gangan too tired and whether you would get that tired too someday. The question hung in the air between them like a heavy cloud. William had always known this day would come, but knowing something and living it are two very different things. His grandmother had been the constant in his life, the steady presence who had guided him through his mother's death, his father's struggles, and his own journey into adulthood and marriage. "She wants to see us today," William said quietly. "All of us. She specifically asked for the children to come." His voice cracked slightly on the last words. The Queen rarely asked for anything directly, so when she made a request, everyone understood its importance. Kate nodded, already knowing what this meant. They had been preparing for this moment for weeks, having quiet conversations about how to help their children say goodbye to someone who meant the world to them. The Queen had been not just their great-grandmother, but a source of stories, wisdom, and unconditional love. As they prepared to leave for the palace, Kate watched William move through their morning routine with careful precision. He straightened his tie 3 times, checked his watch repeatedly, and kept running his hands through his hair, all signs that he was trying to maintain control when everything felt like it was slipping away. "She's proud of you, you know?" Kate said as they walked toward the car where their protection officers waited. "She tells me all the time how well you've grown into your role, how much you care about people, how good you are with the children." William managed a small smile. "She's been saying things like that more often lately. Last week she told me about her own father, and how he never expected to be king either. She said that sometimes the best leaders are the ones who never wanted the job in the first place, because they understand how precious it is." The drive to see the Queen was quiet, filled with the kind of silence that speaks louder than words. Both William and Kate were lost in their own thoughts, remembering different moments with the woman who had been the center of their family for so long. Kate thought about the first time the Queen had invited her for tea, how nervous she had been, and how kind and welcoming Her Majesty had been despite all the protocol and formality. William remembered being a small boy, sitting in his grandmother's study while she worked on state papers. She would let him draw pictures at the small table in the corner, and sometimes she would ask his opinion about things, not because an 8-year-old boy had any real wisdom to offer, but because she wanted him to feel important and included. When they arrived at the palace, the staff moved with quiet efficiency. Everyone seemed to understand that this was a special day, a day that required extra care and gentleness. The Queen's private secretary met them at the door, his usual formal demeanor softened by genuine concern and sadness. "Her Majesty is in the morning room," he said quietly. "She's been looking forward to your visit all week. The doctors say she's having a good day today. She's alert and comfortable." As they walked through the familiar hallways, William felt like he was moving through a dream. Everything looked the same, the paintings, the furniture, the way the light streamed through the tall windows. But somehow everything felt different too. It was as if the palace itself knew that an era was coming to an end. Kate squeezed his hand as they approached the morning room door. "Remember," she whispered, "she needs to see that we're going to be okay. She needs to know that her legacy will continue, that everything she's worked for and cared about will be safe with us." William took a deep breath and straightened his shoulders. Kate was right, as she so often was. This wasn't just about saying goodbye. It was about showing the Queen that her life's work would live on, that the values she had instilled in her family would guide them in the years to come. As he reached for the door handle, William felt the full weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders, but also a deep sense of gratitude for everything his grandmother had taught him about duty, service, and love. The morning room had always been the Queen's favorite space in the palace. Unlike the grand staterooms with their formal portraits and golden furniture, this room felt warm and personal. Family photographs covered every available surface, showing decades of christenings, weddings, holidays, and quiet family moments. The Queen sat in her favorite armchair, a soft cashmere blanket across her lap, looking frailer than William had ever seen her, but with her eyes still bright and alert. "William, my dear boy," she said, her voice softer than usual but filled with warmth. "And Catherine, how lovely you look." The Queen's face lit up as she saw them, though Kate noticed how much effort it seemed to take for her to smile. The illness had stolen some of her strength, but it couldn't touch the love that radiated from her whenever she saw her family. Kate moved forward first, bending down to kiss the Queen's cheek gently. "We brought some photographs," she said, holding up a small album. "The children made them into a book for you. They've been working on it for weeks, choosing their favorite pictures and writing little notes next to each one." The Queen's eyes brightened as she took the album with careful hands. Her fingers, once so steady as they signed documents and waved to crowds, now moved slowly as she opened the first page. There was George at his first day of school, looking serious and grown up in his uniform. Charlotte spinning in her favorite pink dress. Louis taking his first steps in the palace garden. "They grow so quickly," the Queen murmured, tracing one finger along Charlotte's smiling face in the photograph. "It seems like yesterday that Charles was their age. And now look at him, about to be—" She paused, the weight of what was coming settling over the room like a gentle but unmistakable presence. William sat down in the chair across from her, the same chair he had occupied for countless conversations over the years. "Granny, we need to talk about what comes next," he said gently. "Not because we want to, but because you've always taught us that facing difficult things honestly is the only way forward." The Queen nodded slowly. She had been thinking about this conversation for months, knowing that her family needed guidance not just for the immediate future, but for the years that would follow. "I've been writing letters," she said quietly. "One for your father, one for you, and one for each of the children when they're old enough to understand. I wanted to make sure that my thoughts and feelings were preserved exactly as I meant them." Kate felt tears beginning to form in her eyes but blinked them back. The Queen had always been practical about emotional things, never one to avoid difficult topics or pretend that unpleasant realities didn't exist. But hearing her talk so matter-of-factly about her own death was still heartbreaking. "The letters aren't sad," the Queen continued, as if she could read Kate's thoughts. "They're full of memories and hopes and all the things I want you to remember about our family and our history. I've written about the day William was born and how proud I was when you joined our family, Catherine. I've written about watching George take his first steps in these very rooms, and how Charlotte reminds me so much of Margaret when she was small." She paused to catch her breath, and William reached over to take her hand. Her skin felt paper-thin and cool, but her grip was still firm. "I've also written about the things I hope for your futures. I want George to know that being king isn't about power or privilege. It's about service and sacrifice and putting others before yourself. I want Charlotte to understand that she can be anything she wants to be, that the world is changing and there will be opportunities for her that didn't exist when I was young." "And Louis?" Kate asked softly, thinking of their youngest who was still so small that he barely understood what was happening. The Queen smiled, the first truly bright smile of the morning. "Louis will need to find his own path just like Harry did, just like Margaret did. Being the spare isn't easy, but it can also be a gift. He'll have more freedom than George, more chances to make choices based on what he truly wants rather than what duty demands." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, each lost in their own thoughts. Outside the windows, life in London continued as it always did. People hurrying to work, tourists taking photographs, the everyday business of a great city. But inside this room, time seemed suspended, as if the whole world was holding its breath. "I need you to promise me something," the Queen said suddenly, her voice gaining strength. "I need you to promise that you'll take care of each other. William, your father will need your support more than ever. Being king is lonely, even with all the advisors and staff and ceremony. Catherine, the family will look to you for stability and warmth just as they've looked to me." Kate nodded, understanding the weight of what was being asked of her. She had always known that marrying William meant taking on responsibilities that went far beyond being a wife and mother, but hearing it stated so directly by the Queen made it feel more real and immediate. "I also need you to promise that you'll remember to live your own lives," the Queen continued. "Don't let duty consume everything. Make time for laughter and silliness and all the small moments that make life worth living. I've sometimes regretted how serious we all became, how focused on protocol and proper behavior. The children need to see that you can be both royal and human." William squeezed her hand gently. "We promise, Granny, all of it. We promise." The Queen settled back in her chair, looking suddenly very tired but also peaceful. "There's something else," she said after a moment. "I want you to know that when the time comes, when I'm no longer here, I don't want you to be sad for too long. Grief is natural and necessary, but I've lived a long and full life. I've seen my children grow up and have children of their own. I've served my country for more than 70 years. I've been loved and I've loved in return. Not everyone is so fortunate." Kate reached over and took the Queen's other hand so that she was connected to both of them. "We'll miss you terribly," she said simply, "but we'll also celebrate everything you've given us, all the wisdom and love and example you've set." The Queen looked at both of them, her eyes moving back and forth between their faces as if she was trying to memorize this moment. "You two have given me such joy," she said softly. "Watching your love story unfold, seeing you become parents, witnessing the way you've grown into your roles, it's been one of the greatest privileges of my life. I know the future is in good hands." Later that afternoon, the children arrived at the palace with their nanny. George walked with the careful dignity of a boy who knew he was entering a serious situation, while Charlotte skipped alongside him, her natural energy barely contained by the formal setting. Little Louis toddled between them, more interested in the patterns on the carpet than the gravity of the occasion. The Queen had requested that they meet in the garden, despite the cool October weather. She wanted to be surrounded by growing things, by the roses and hedges that had been her companions for so many decades. William helped her into her wheelchair, and Kate wrapped an extra blanket around her shoulders before they made their way outside. "Gangan," Charlotte called out as soon as she saw the Queen, running ahead of the others. But she stopped short when she got close, suddenly uncertain. Even at her young age, she could sense that something was different about her great-grandmother. "Come here, my darling," the Queen said gently, patting her lap. Charlotte climbed up carefully, settling into the Queen's arms with the trust that only children possess. "I've been waiting to see you all day." George approached more cautiously, his serious 7-year-old mind processing the changes in his great-grandmother's appearance. "Are you feeling better today, Gangan?" he asked politely, but his eyes were worried. "I'm feeling peaceful," the Queen replied honestly. "Sometimes that's even better than feeling well." She reached out to touch George's cheek gently. "I have something very important to tell all of you, and I need you to listen carefully." William and Kate stood nearby, ready to step in if the conversation became too difficult for the children to handle. They had discussed how much to tell them, how to balance honesty with age-appropriate explanations. "You know that people sometimes get very sick," the Queen began, her voice gentle but clear. "And sometimes, when people are very old like I am, and very sick, their bodies get too tired to keep going." Louis had wandered over to examine a butterfly that had landed on a nearby flower. But George and Charlotte were both listening intently. Charlotte's small hand found the Queen's, holding it tightly. "Are you going to die, Gangan?" Charlotte asked with the directness that only children possess. Adults had been dancing around this question for weeks, but Charlotte simply needed to know. The Queen took a deep breath. "Yes, my sweet girl, I am. Not today, and maybe not tomorrow, but soon. And I wanted to tell you myself because I love you too much to let you find out any other way." George's eyes filled with tears, but he tried to blink them back. "Will it hurt?" he asked quietly. "No, darling. The doctors are making sure that I'm comfortable and not in pain, and I'll be surrounded by all the people who love me most." The Queen's voice remained steady, even as William wiped his own eyes with the back of his hand. "But who will be the Queen when you're gone?" Charlotte asked, her practical mind already moving to the next logical question. "Your granddad Charles will be the king," the Queen explained. "And someday when you're all grown up, your daddy will be king too. And maybe if you want it, George, you'll be king after that." George considered this seriously. "Will I have to wear the heavy crown?" he asked. The Queen laughed, the sound like silver bells in the garden air. "Only on very special occasions. Most of the time, being king is about helping people and taking care of the country, not wearing crowns." Kate knelt down beside the wheelchair so she was at the children's eye level. "Gungun wants us to remember all the happy times we've had together," she said softly. "Like when she taught you to drive the little Land Rover at Balmoral, George. And Charlotte, remember when she let you help her feed the corgis?" Charlotte giggled at the memory. "Mick tried to eat my fingers. And Louis," the Queen said, turning to their youngest, who had now discovered a small pile of fallen leaves. "You probably won't remember this day when you're older, but I want you to know that your Gungun loved you very much." They spent the next hour sharing memories and stories. The Queen told them about their father when he was little, how he used to hide behind her skirts when he was shy, and how he once got into trouble for trying to slide down the palace banisters. She told them about their grandfather Charles, who loved to garden and paint and who always worried too much about everything. "Your daddy gets that from Granddad," the Queen said with a wink at William. "The worrying, I mean. It comes from caring so much about doing the right thing." As the afternoon light began to fade, the Queen asked to speak to each child individually. She took George aside first, walking slowly with him to a bench under an old oak tree that had been planted when her own father was king. "George, you're going to be king someday," she said seriously. "That's a big responsibility, but you don't have to think about it too much right now. What I want you to remember is that being royal isn't about being better than other people. It's about serving them. Can you remember that?" George nodded solemnly. "Will you watch me from heaven like Mummy says happens?" "I'll always be watching," the Queen assured him. "And I'll be very proud of the man you become." With Charlotte, the conversation was different. "You, my darling, are going to change the world," the Queen told her. "You're smart and brave, and you ask questions about everything. Don't ever let anyone tell you that princesses have to be quiet and good all the time. Some of the best princesses in history were troublemakers." Charlotte giggled. "Am I a troublemaker, Gungun?" "The very best kind," the Queen replied, hugging her close. Even little Louis got his moment, though it was mostly the Queen holding him, while he played with her pearls and babbled in his toddler language. "Be happy, little one," she whispered to him. "Be curious and kind, and don't take life too seriously." As the afternoon drew to a close, the Queen looked around at her family gathered in the garden she loved. William and Kate standing together, supporting each other as they always did. The children playing quietly nearby, their natural resilience already helping them process what they had learned. "This has been perfect," she said quietly to William as he helped her back into the wheelchair. "I couldn't have asked for a better day." That evening, after the children had been taken home and tucked into bed with extra hugs and stories, William and Kate remained with the Queen for dinner. It was a simple meal, served in her private dining room, with just the three of them and the comfortable silence of people who didn't need to fill every moment with conversation. "Thank you," the Queen said, as they were finishing their dessert. "For bringing the children, for letting them ask their questions, for handling all of this with such grace. I know it wasn't easy." Kate reached across the table to squeeze her hand. "They needed to hear it from you. They needed to know that it's okay to be sad, but also that they're going to be all right." The Queen smiled. "They will be more than all right. They're going to be extraordinary." The call came at 3 in the morning, piercing through the quiet darkness of William and Kate's bedroom like a sharp blade. William answered on the first ring, already knowing what the voice on the other end would tell him. Kate sat up immediately, her heart racing as she watched his face in the dim light from his phone screen. "We'll be there in 20 minutes, William said quietly into the phone, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. He ended the call and turned to Kate, who was already getting out of bed. "Is it time?" she asked, though she already knew the answer from his expression. William nodded, unable to speak for a moment. They had been preparing for this call for weeks. but nothing could really prepare someone for the reality of it. The doctor says it could be hours, or it could be. He didn't finish the sentence. They dressed quickly and quietly, moving through their morning routine with practiced efficiency. Despite the early hour and the gravity of the situation, Kate called their protection officers while William checked on the children, making sure they were still sleeping peacefully in their beds. The drive to the palace was surreal. London looked different at this hour. Empty streets that were usually bustling with traffic, streetlights creating pools of yellow light in the darkness, the occasional taxi or delivery truck the only signs of life. Kate reached over and took William's hand, feeling how tense he was despite his outward calm. "She's been ready for this," Kate said softly, trying to offer comfort to both of them. "She's been saying goodbye in her own way for weeks now. Remember what she told us about living a full life, about being at peace with what comes next." William squeezed her hand gratefully. "I know, it's just, she's been there my entire life. I can't imagine a world without her in it." When they arrived at the palace, they were met by Charles, who looked as if he had aged years in just the few weeks since they had last seen him. His usually perfect hair was disheveled, his tie crooked, and his eyes were red with unshed tears. "How is she?" William asked, embracing his father. "Peaceful," Charles replied, his voice rough with emotion. "She's been asking for you both. Anne and Edward are already here, and Andrew is on his way. The doctor says she's comfortable, but—" He couldn't finish the sentence either. They made their way through the familiar corridors, but everything felt different now. The palace staff moved quietly, speaking in whispers, their usual bustling efficiency replaced by a somber reverence. Everyone understood that history was being made in these moments, that they were witnessing the end of an era. The Queen's bedroom was dimly lit, with only a small lamp beside her bed casting a gentle glow. She looked so small lying there, dwarfed by the grand four-poster bed that had been hers for so many decades, but her eyes were still alert when she saw William and Kate enter the room. "My dear ones," she whispered, her voice barely audible but filled with warmth. "I'm so glad you're here." Kate moved to one side of the bed while William took the other, each of them taking one of the Queen's hands. Her skin was cool and papery, but her grip was still firm. Around the room, other family members sat quietly in chairs or stood near the windows, all of them united in this final vigil. "The children?" the Queen asked quietly. "They're sleeping," Kate assured her. "They don't know yet. We wanted to wait until morning until we could tell them properly." The Queen nodded approvingly. "Good, let them sleep. Let them have one more night of innocence." She closed her eyes for a moment, gathering her strength. "I've been thinking about all the goodbyes I've said over the years. My parents, Philip, so many friends and family members. I always wondered what I would say at the end, what my last words would be." "Don't talk like that," William said gently. "You don't have to say goodbye yet." The Queen opened her eyes and looked at him with a small smile. "Oh, my darling boy, I've been saying goodbye for weeks now. Every conversation, every shared meal, every moment together has been my way of letting you all know how much you mean to me." She turned her head slightly to look at Kate. "Promise me you'll help him," she said quietly. "He'll try to carry everything on his own shoulders, just like his father does. But he doesn't have to. You're partners in this, equals in every way that matters." Kate felt tears beginning to slip down her cheeks. "I promise. We're a team. We always have been. And promise me you'll let the children be children for as long as possible. There will be time enough for duty and responsibility when they're older. For now, let them laugh and play and make mistakes and learn from them." Both William and Kate nodded, understanding that these weren't just requests but final instructions from a woman who had devoted her entire life to her family and her country. As the night wore on, the Queen drifted in and out of consciousness, but she always seemed to know when someone new entered the room or when someone took her hand. She spoke quietly with each of her children, sharing private words and memories that would stay with them forever. Around dawn, as the first light began to filter through the heavy curtains, the Queen's breathing became more shallow and irregular. The doctor, who had been monitoring her throughout the night, checked her pulse and looked meaningfully at the family gathered around the bed. "It won't be long now," he said quietly. Charles moved closer to his mother's bedside, taking her hand and speaking to her in low, gentle tones. "It's all right, Mama, you can rest now. We'll take care of everything. We'll take care of each other." The Queen's eyes fluttered open one last time, moving slowly around the room to look at each member of her family. When her gaze found William and Kate still holding her hands, she managed one final, peaceful smile. "Thank you," she whispered, the words barely audible. "For everything. For the love, for the laughter, for giving me such beautiful great-grandchildren, for showing me that the future of our family is in good hands." She closed her eyes then, her breathing becoming even more shallow. The room fell into complete silence except for the soft ticking of the antique clock on the mantelpiece and the gentle sounds of breathing from the people who loved her most. William felt the exact moment when she let go. Her hand, which had been gripping his with surprising strength, suddenly relaxed. Her face, which had shown the strain of illness for so many weeks, became completely peaceful. The woman who had been the center of their world, the constant around which everything else revolved, was gone. The silence in the room was profound, sacred. Nobody spoke or moved for several long moments, as if they were all afraid that any sound might disturb the peace that had settled over the Queen. Finally, Charles leaned down and kissed his mother's forehead gently. "Goodbye, Mama," he whispered. "Thank you for everything." In the hours that followed the Queen's peaceful passing, the palace transformed into a carefully orchestrated symphony of protocol and grief. William and Kate found themselves caught between their private sorrow and the public duties that death brings to the royal family. Phone calls had to be made, statements prepared, and arrangements confirmed for what would become one of the most watched events in modern history. But first, they had to tell their children. They drove home as the sun was fully rising, London beginning to wake up to a world that had fundamentally changed overnight, though most people didn't know it yet. The official announcement wouldn't come for several hours, giving the family time to process their loss privately before sharing it with the world. The children were having breakfast when William and Kate returned, their nanny having maintained the normal routine despite the unusual early morning absence of their parents. George looked up from his cereal bowl, immediately sensing something different in his parents' faces. "Mummy, Daddy, why do you look sad?" Charlotte asked, her 5-year-old intuition picking up on the atmosphere in the room. Kate sat down at the breakfast table while William remained standing, his hands clasped behind his back in a gesture the children recognized as serious. "We need to tell you something important," Kate began gently. "Do you remember our conversation with Gangan in the garden yesterday?" George nodded solemnly, while Charlotte's eyes grew wide with understanding that she couldn't quite articulate yet. Louis continued eating his breakfast, blissfully unaware of the gravity of the moment. "Gangan died peacefully this morning," William said quietly. "She wasn't in any pain and she was surrounded by all the people who loved her most." Charlotte immediately began to cry, not the dramatic tears of a typical childhood upset, but the deep, genuine sorrow of someone who truly understood what loss meant. George's face crumpled, and he pushed his cereal bowl away as if food had suddenly become impossible to consider. Kate gathered both older children into her arms, holding them close while they cried. "It's okay to be sad," she whispered into their hair. "It's okay to cry. Gangan would want us to miss her because that means we loved her. But she said she would watch us from heaven." Charlotte sobbed against Kate's shoulder. "How will we know if she's watching?" William knelt down beside them, his own eyes bright with unshed tears. "We'll know because we'll feel her love with us always. Every time we're kind to someone, every time we help people who need it, every time we remember the stories she told us, that's Gangan watching over us." George, trying to be strong as the eldest, asked the question that was weighing on all their minds. "What happens now? Will Granddad be king right away?" "Yes," William replied. "Granddad becomes king immediately, and we'll all need to support him, just like we supported Gangan. But for today, we're just going to be sad together as a family." The next few hours passed in a strange blur of activity and stillness. The children stayed close to their parents, needing extra hugs and reassurance as they processed their first real experience with death. Kate canceled all their engagements for the week, understanding that the children would need time and attention to work through their grief. At precisely 11 o'clock, the official announcement was released. William and Kate watched from their sitting room as the news spread across the world in real time. Social media exploded with tributes. News channels switched to continuous coverage, and people began gathering outside palace gates to leave flowers and pay their respects. "Look at all those people," Kate said softly, watching the television coverage. "She touched so many lives." William nodded, feeling both proud and overwhelmed by the outpouring of love for his grandmother. She always said that the monarchy was only as strong as the people's faith in it. I think she would be amazed by this response. Over the next few days, the world watched as William and Kate navigated their grief while fulfilling their public duties with remarkable grace. They attended meetings about funeral arrangements, received diplomats and world leaders who came to pay their respects, and made countless decisions about protocol and ceremony. But it was their private moments that revealed the true depth of their loss and their love. Kate found William one evening standing in the nursery that had been the Queen's favorite room when she visited their home. It was where she had held Louis as a baby, where she had read stories to Charlotte, where she had patiently taught George to tie his shoes. The room still held traces of her presence, a book she had been reading to the children, a shawl she had left draped over the rocking chair. "I keep expecting her to call," William said quietly, not turning around when he heard Kate enter. Every evening around 6, she would call to check in, to ask about the children, to share some small piece of news about her day. I actually reached for the phone this evening when it rang, thinking it might be her. Kate moved to stand beside him, slipping her arm around his waist. Grief is strange that way. Our minds know what's happened, but our hearts haven't caught up yet. I found myself wanting to ask her advice about the funeral arrangements, William continued. She had such specific ideas about everything, and I want to make sure we honor her wishes perfectly. But the people who would know best what she wanted are gone too. Philip, her mother, her sister. "We'll do our best," Kate assured him, "and she would understand that we're doing everything with love, even if we don't get every detail exactly right." They stood together in comfortable silence, both lost in memories. Outside, they could hear the distant sound of the crowds that had gathered to mourn the Queen. People from all walks of life united in their grief for a woman who had been a constant presence in their lives for decades. "The children asked me today if they would have to be sad forever," Kate said after a while. Charlotte wanted to know if it was okay to laugh at something funny, or if that would mean she didn't love Gangan enough. William smiled sadly. "What did you tell her?" "I told her that Gangan would be very upset if we stopped laughing and being happy. I told her that the best way to honor someone's memory is to live fully, to find joy even in sadness, to love each other even more because we know how precious time together really is." She was right about that, as she was about so many things, William said. "Do you remember what she told us about not being sad for too long?" "She said grief was necessary, but that we shouldn't let it consume us." Kate nodded. "She lived such a full life, saw so many changes, loved so many people. When I think about it that way, her death feels less like a tragedy and more like the completion of something beautiful." They heard footsteps in the hallway, and George appeared in the doorway, clutching his favorite stuffed animal. "I can't sleep," he said quietly. "I keep thinking about Gangan." Without hesitation, both William and Kate opened their arms to him. George climbed onto William's lap, settling in with the easy trust of a child who knows he's completely loved and safe. "What are you thinking about?" Kate asked gently, smoothing his hair. "I'm thinking about the last thing she said to me," George replied. "In the garden. She said she would always be watching, and that she would be proud of the man I become. Do you think she can see me now?" William held his son a little tighter. "I think she can see your kind heart, and how much you love your family and how hard you're trying to understand something very difficult. And I think she's very proud of you already." "Will you tell me stories about her when I'm older?" George asked. "So I don't forget?" "We'll tell you so many stories," Kate promised, "that you'll feel like you knew her your whole life, even when you're grown up with children of your own." The morning of the funeral dawned clear and bright, as if the weather itself wanted to honor the Queen's memory with the kind of crisp autumn day she had always loved. William stood at his dressing room window, adjusting his military uniform for what felt like the 100th time. His hands were steady, but Kate could see the tension in his shoulders as he prepared for what would be one of the most difficult and important days of his life. "The children are ready," Kate said softly, entering the room in her elegant black coat and hat. She had chosen her outfit carefully, wanting to look dignified and respectful, while also being practical enough to comfort 3 young children through what would be a very long and emotional day. They had debated whether to bring the children to the funeral at all. Charlotte and Louis were still so young, and even George at 7 might struggle with the length and formality of the service. But in the end, they had decided that the children needed to be there, needed to see how the world was saying goodbye to their beloved Gangan. "How are they doing?" William asked, turning away from the window to face her. In his dress uniform with its medals and insignia representing his military service and royal duties, he looked every inch the future king. But Kate could see the little boy in his eyes, the grandson who was about to say a final goodbye to the woman who had shaped so much of his life. George is being very brave, asking practical questions about the ceremony and the procession. Charlotte keeps asking if Gangan can see everything that's happening. And Louis, Kate smiled despite the sadness of the day. Louis is mostly excited about riding in the big car and seeing all the horses. They made their way downstairs to where the children were waiting with their nanny. George looked solemn and grown up in his dark suit, his hair carefully combed and his small face set in an expression of determined composure. Charlotte wore a simple black dress with a small pearl necklace that had been a gift from the Queen, and she clutched a small bouquet of white roses. "Remember what we talked about," Kate said gently, kneeling down to the children's level. "Today will be very long and there will be lots of people and everyone will be sad. But we're going to stay together and we're going to remember all the happy times we had with Gangan." The drive to Westminster Abbey was unlike anything any of them had ever experienced. The streets of London were lined with people, thousands upon thousands of mourners who had come to pay their respects. Many held flowers, others small photographs of the Queen, and many were openly weeping as the funeral procession passed by. "Look at all the people who loved Gangan," Charlotte whispered, pressing her face to the car window. The sight of the crowd seemed to comfort her rather than overwhelm her, as if seeing so many others sharing in their grief made it feel less lonely. George sat quietly, taking in everything with his serious 7-year-old eyes. "Daddy," he said suddenly, "when you die, will all these people come to say goodbye to you too?" The question was so direct and unexpected that William had to take a moment to compose himself before answering. "I hope so," he said honestly. "I hope that by the time I'm very old I'll have done enough good things to deserve that kind of love." Westminster Abbey was filled to capacity with world leaders, family members and representatives from every organization and charity the Queen had supported during her long reign. But despite the grandeur of the setting and the historical importance of the moment, the service felt deeply personal and intimate. Kate held Charlotte on her lap during most of the ceremony, while George sat between her and William, occasionally reaching over to hold his father's hand when the emotion became too much. Louis, true to his 2-year-old nature, fell asleep halfway through the service, his small head resting against Kate's shoulder. When it came time for the eulogy, Charles stood up slowly, his face pale but determined. He had worked on his speech for days, trying to find the right words to capture not just his mother's public achievements, but the private woman who had been his anchor and guide throughout his life. "My mother was many things to many people," he began, his voice carrying clearly through the ancient abbey. "She was your queen, your servant, your constant companion through decades of change and challenge. But to me and to my family, she was simply the most extraordinary woman we have ever known." He spoke about her sense of duty, her unwavering faith, her quiet humor, and her deep love for her family and her country. But the moment that brought tears to almost every eye in the Abbey was when he talked about her as a great-grandmother. In her final years, she found perhaps her greatest joy in her great-grandchildren, Charles said, his eyes finding William and Kate in the front row. She delighted in their questions, their energy, their innocent observations about the world. They kept her young, kept her curious, kept her laughing, and they gave her the greatest gift of all, the certainty that the future of our family and our nation is in capable hands. George began to cry quietly during this part of the eulogy, and William put his arm around his son, holding him close while his own tears fell silently. Kate felt Charlotte's small hand reach up to wipe away her tears, the 5-year-old instinctively wanting to comfort her mother. The procession from the Abbey to Windsor Castle for the private burial took over an hour, winding through the streets of London and out into the countryside the Queen had loved. The children handled it better than anyone had expected, taking turns napping and watching the crowds that lined the entire route. "Everyone is so sad," Charlotte observed, watching the people they passed. "But they're not the angry kind of sad. They're the loving kind of sad." Her observation was so perceptive that both William and Kate were struck speechless for a moment. Even at 5, Charlotte had identified something profound about the day. That this wasn't just about loss, but about love and gratitude, and the celebration of a life well lived. The private burial service at Windsor was small and intimate, attended only by close family members. They gathered around the grave where the Queen would be laid to rest beside Philip, her beloved husband of more than 70 years. The setting was peaceful and beautiful, surrounded by the gardens she had tended and the landscapes she had walked for decades. William found himself thinking about all the times he had visited his grandparents here, all the family gatherings and quiet conversations and moments of ordinary happiness that had taken place in this very spot. It felt right that she should rest here, in the place that had been most truly home to her. As the final prayers were said and the last flowers were placed, the family stood together in a moment of perfect silence. The autumn wind rustled through the trees, and somewhere in the distance a church bell tolled softly. It was a moment of profound peace, the kind of peace that comes at the end of something beautiful and well completed. George looked up at William with eyes that seemed older than his 7 years. "Is she really gone now, Daddy?" William considered the question carefully, wanting to give his son an answer that was both truthful and comforting. "Her body is gone," he said finally. "But everything that made Gangan special, her love, her wisdom, her kindness, all the lessons she taught us, those things will live on forever. In us, in you, in every person whose life she touched." Charlotte, who had been unusually quiet during the burial service, suddenly spoke up. "I think I can feel her watching us," she said simply. "She feels happy." And somehow in that moment they all felt it too. Not sadness or loss, but a sense of completion and gratitude and the quiet certainty that love, once given, never truly ends. 3 months after the funeral, life had begun to settle into a new rhythm for William and Kate's family. The intense media attention had gradually faded. The world had moved on to other news, and they were learning to navigate their daily lives without the Queen's steady presence. But her influence remained everywhere, in the way they made decisions, in the stories they told the children, in the quiet moments when they felt her guidance like a gentle hand on their shoulders. On a crisp February morning, Kate found William in his study, reading through a stack of letters that had been arriving steadily since the Queen's death. People from around the world had written to share their memories, their condolences, and their gratitude for the Queen's decades of service. Some were from world leaders and dignitaries, but many more were from ordinary people whose lives had been touched by her in small but meaningful ways. "Listen to this one," William said, looking up as Kate entered with 2 cups of tea. "It's from a woman in Canada whose grandmother met the Queen during a royal visit in the 1970s. She says her grandmother never stopped talking about how kind and interested the Queen was, how she asked about her family and remembered details from their conversation months later." Kate settled into the chair across from his desk, cradling her teacup in her hands. "There are so many stories like that. People who met her for just a few minutes but felt like she really saw them, really cared about them. That's what made her special," William said, setting the letter aside. "She had this gift for making everyone feel important, from prime ministers to school children. I keep thinking about that when I'm at engagements now, trying to give people that same feeling of being truly heard." Since becoming the new Prince of Wales, William had thrown himself into his royal duties with renewed purpose. He and Kate had taken on many of the Queen's patronages and engagements, but they were also working to put their own stamp on the role, focusing particularly on issues they were passionate about like mental health, environmental conservation, and early childhood development. "Speaking of engagements," Kate said with a smile, "Charlotte has been asking when she can come to one with us. She wants to help people like Gangan did." William laughed, the first genuine laugh Kate had heard from him in weeks. "She's 5 years old and already has a stronger sense of duty than half the cabinet. The Queen would have loved that." They were interrupted by the sound of running footsteps in the hallway, followed by George's voice calling out, "Mummy, Daddy, come quickly." They found all 3 children in the sitting room, gathered around the coffee table where they had been working on a project. Charlotte looked up with excitement shining in her eyes. "We made a memory book for Gangan," she announced proudly. "George helped with the writing and I did the pictures and Louis helped with the stickers." The book was a simple photo album that the children had filled with drawings, photographs, and carefully written memories of their great-grandmother. Each page told a different story: their last visit to the garden, the time the Queen had taught George to drive the small Land Rover at Balmoral, Charlotte's memory of helping feed the corgis. "This page is my favorite," George said, turning to a drawing he had made of the Queen sitting in her garden surrounded by flowers and butterflies. Underneath, in his careful 7-year-old handwriting, he had written, "Gan loved beautiful things and made everything more beautiful." Kate felt tears spring to her eyes as she looked at the children's work. "This is the most wonderful thing I've ever seen," she said, pulling all 3 children into a hug. "Gan would have treasured this. Can we take it to her?" Louis asked with the matter-of-fact question of a 2-year-old who didn't quite understand the permanence of death. "We can't take it to her," Charlotte explained gently to her little brother. "But we can keep it here and look at it whenever we miss her. And we can tell stories about all the pictures." Later that evening, after the children had gone to bed, William and Kate sat together looking through the memory book. Each page revealed something new about how the children were processing their grief and holding on to their connection with the Queen. "Look at this," Kate said, pointing to a page where Charlotte had drawn a picture of herself wearing a crown. The caption read, "When I grow up, I want to help people just like Gan did." "And this one," William added, showing her George's drawing of the family tree he had been working on in school. At the top he had drawn the Queen with wings, watching over all the branches below. "They're going to be okay," Kate said softly. "Look how they're turning their sadness into something positive, something that honors her memory." William nodded, feeling a sense of peace that had been elusive since the Queen's death. She knew they would be. She saw something in them that gave her confidence about the future. A few weeks later, on what would have been the Queen's birthday, the family made a special trip to place flowers on her grave. It was a private visit, just the 5 of them. And they took their time walking through the garden she had loved so much. George carried a small bouquet of daffodils, the Queen's favorite spring flower, while Charlotte had insisted on bringing a small drawing she had made of the family. Louis toddled between his parents, stopping frequently to examine interesting stones or chase after butterflies. At the gravesite, they each took turns sharing a memory or a message. William spoke about how grateful he was for all the lessons she had taught him about leadership and service. Kate talked about how the Queen had welcomed her into the family with such warmth and acceptance. When it was the children's turn, George stepped forward with the solemnity he always showed in important moments. "Happy birthday, Gan," he said quietly. "I'm trying very hard to be kind to everyone just like you taught me. And I'm taking good care of Charlotte and Louis just like you asked." Charlotte's message was simpler but no less heartfelt. "I miss you every day, but I'm not sad all the time anymore. Mummy says that means I'm healing, and that you would want me to be happy." Even Louis, prompted by Kate, managed a sweet, "Happy birthday, Gan," before running off to chase a particularly interesting butterfly. As they walked back through the gardens, William felt his phone buzz with a text from Charles. "Hope today is bringing you peace." Mother would have loved seeing the children at the garden. She always said they were her greatest joy in those final years. That evening, as they were tucking the children into bed, Charlotte asked the question that had been on all their minds. "Do you think Gan knows about all the nice things people say about her?" Kate sat down on the edge of Charlotte's bed, smoothing her daughter's hair away from her face. "I think she knows that people loved her, and I think she can see how hard we're all trying to continue the good work she started. Most of all, I think she knows how much we love each other and how that love helps us through the sad times." "Will we always miss her?" George asked from his bed across the room. "Yes," William answered honestly. "But missing someone isn't a bad thing. It means they were important to us, that they made our lives better, and as time goes on, the missing will hurt less and the happy memories will feel stronger." Charlotte considered this seriously. "Like how when I scrape my knee it hurts a lot at first, but then it gets better, but I still have a little scar to remember what happened." "Exactly like that," Kate said, amazed by her daughter's insight. "Grief leaves a little scar on our hearts, but it's a scar that reminds us of love." 6 months later, on a beautiful summer day, the family was having a picnic in their garden when Charlotte suddenly stopped eating her sandwich and looked up at the sky thoughtfully. "I just remembered something Gan told me," she said. "She said that the best way to honor someone's memory is to live fully and find joy even when we're sad. I think we're doing that now." William and Kate exchanged a look of profound gratitude. Their children had not only survived their first encounter with loss, but they had emerged from it with wisdom and resilience that amazed their parents every day. The Queen's final gift to her family wasn't just her love and her example. It was the confidence that they would carry on her legacy of service, duty, and above all, love for one another. That night, as William and Kate sat together in their garden watching the sunset, they felt the Queen's presence not as a loss or an absence, but as a continuing influence that would guide them through all the challenges and joys that lay ahead. Her graceful farewell had become their graceful beginning, and her love would live on in every choice they made, every kindness they showed, and every moment they chose to embrace life fully despite the inevitable sadness that comes with loving deeply. The Queen was gone, but her legacy lived on in the hearts and actions of those she had loved most, and perhaps that, after all, was the most beautiful farewell of all.